Yo, what's going on, snipers? And yes, it is finally time for me to release my 1999-2000 roster build. So I'm going to be showing you guys it through franchise mode instead on how it works and how it's set up, because I spent like 300 plus hours working on this roster, and I better show you guys basically how it's set up in franchise mode so you can kind of see how it works out and all that type of thing. But yeah, this roster took a very long time, and a couple things to note: you want to use the actual NHL teams for the NHL teams. That is a crucial thing if you want to be getting unsigned players in this roster build. If you obviously don't care about those unsigned players, I would still recommend using real teams. But if you don't care about the unsigned players at all, and you want to use my created teams with the created jerseys, arenas, all that type of thing, substitute the NHL teams for the created teams, and then you'll have them. But obviously keeping the AHL teams, the custom teams that I made as well. Obviously there's going to be a setup portion of this video after the fact, so you guys can go back to that and see how I set it up, so this way you guys can see how franchise mode should be set up and properly ready to go. But this roster, like I said, is crazy in depth, and I'm 100% sure this is the biggest roster build that's ever been made on either Xbox One, Series X. It's like the biggest roster build on a modern console. Probably the last biggest roster build like this type of thing would be people like modding the games back on PC. That's how long ago there has been since there's actually been like a custom roster this big. Like it's it's pretty damn big. Now one thing I want to note is I forgot to turn off retired jersey numbers randomly, so you will see some players with jersey numbers they didn't actually wear. But that doesn't really matter too much, because I'm here just to basically show you guys how in-depth this roster is. And then obviously you guys could go download it on Xbox Series X and X, and you guys can like leave me some feedback in the comments and all that stuff. And yeah, play around with the roster, try and see what works and what doesn't. And obviously I could always do a version 2 if there is tests and stuff that obviously there's problems with it down the road, but I don't think there is, because I've tested this out for like 5 seasons or so, and I didn't see really much issues. Obviously there's maybe some players over simulating or under simulating, but that's not really anything I could test that much. So anyways, let's show you guys how in-depth this roster is. So first though, I want to tell you guys that basically there is NHL teams, there's AHL team rosters, there's free agents that you could sign to start franchise mode, there's unsigned prospects, and there's 3 to 4 rounds of draft prospects per draft there is, so for 4 drafts, which is insane. So there is a total of 1,750 skaters, which is the new maximum. Obviously the prior maximum was like 600 skaters, so I basically almost tripled the amount of players I could create. I also did make 227 goalies in this roster build, so there's 1,977 different players in this roster. So if you don't think this roster is in depth, then I don't know what to tell you. But let me show you guys what I mean. So let's start off by showing you guys the rosters for the NHL and AHL teams. Obviously this is a very cool stage, so I will show you guys each team. So let's actually go by 4 just to make it a little bit quicker, just because, yeah. Let's start off with the Anaheim Ducks, show you guys each team individually. So you can see basically every team has in their main roster every single NHL player that played a game in the 1999-2000 season. So you have every single player there. And on the defensive side of things, here's their defense. So you can just see there's a big amount of depth in terms of the NHL team. But once again, that is not everything. If you go to in the system, you can see that we have goalies in the AHL. So Corey Hirsch, who was actually traded to Anaheim, but I don't think he even played a game for their AHL team or NHL team. He's down there now because I guess they sent him down. They also have like Nomenko. They have this guy named Blaine Russell, who nobody probably even knows, and I barely even knew this guy. I probably didn't even know this guy at all before I started this roster, but he's got like AHL extra goalie potential. So you have a lot of like low-end talent that will eventually get dropped to the free agent market because the AI doesn't want to bring them back. So there is some weird scenarios with that. But you could also see in the system, in terms of their AHL down there in Cincinnati, they have a lot of players in the minors as well. So guys like Pavel Turnka got sent down, I guess, by them because he was technically on their NHL roster to start. Vitaly Vishnevsky, Ladislav Benezik, Scott Ferguson. Like, I have a ton of AHL players. Not every single player that played for their AHL team, but a good chunk. And the reason why I don't have every single player is because some players didn't actually have like contracts tied to the NHL team. Some players did. So I tried to make all the ones that actually played games for the NHL team or was actually dealt to the NHL team tied to them. So there won't be guys that were basically tied to just the AHL team and never played an NHL game for them. But there is a good chunk of players. Guys like Ladislav Benesic, I think, actually was overseas during this point in time, but he was technically dealt to Anaheim at the deadline, or his rights were, so I added him to their AHL team. And yeah, there's just a ton of depth. You can also see there's unsigned prospects, which I'll show you guys in a tiny little bit, but we just have a ton of creative players in the AHL. Some you might have heard of because you might have seen them in the NHL at some point, like Jeremy Stevenson, but some you might never have heard of in your life. Also, guys like Espen Knudsen was technically, I think, overseas, but he still had Anaheim rights in, and he was claimed by the Blue Jackets, I believe, in the expansion draft. So once again, there is no Columbus in this franchise mode, no Minnesota, no Vegas, no Seattle. So those will be your 28 NHL teams, is everybody else. So yeah, basically you can see the entire AHL team has a ton of depth. And as I mentioned, there is also unsigned prospects for each team. So if we go over to unsigned on Anaheim, you can see they have an unsigned Stephen Pete, who actually never played a game with Anaheim, but was drafted by them. And yeah, basically he actually go on to be an enforcer with the Washington Capitals for a bit. You also do have Trent Hunter, who was actually dealt in the offseason of this season by the Islanders, or not by the Islanders, by the Ducks to the Islanders. So this was actually a good acquisition that Mike Milbury actually made. There wasn't really a lot of those. So you have Trent Hunter there, and you also do have Jordan Leopold as well, who was drafted by Anaheim, but actually I think he signed or was dealt to the Calgary Flames, if I remember right. I don't remember if it was part of the J.S. Jaguar trade. I feel like it was, but I honestly don't remember. So you can see that each team has unsigned prospects, which makes this build even more in depth. So it's pretty damn cool. Obviously, I don't want this video being super long, but I am going to still try and skim through every team a little bit. I know some people want to actually see all this. I know some of you don't. But I am going to try and show you guys as much of this roster build as possible. And obviously, we're going to show you guys like the free agents that are available, the players you could draft in this franchise mode as well, that type of thing. But it's a very, very fun roster. And like I said, there is a little bit of issues that I've ran into when testing out this roster. And that is that for some reason, after like, I think it's after even one season, some of the AHL teams get random 48 overall signed, and they don't actually sign any players in free agency that are like 70 plus overall. So for some reason, the AI is very stupid in this game. But at the same time, at least most of these creative players should hold around in franchise mode unless they don't really have much potential. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with that. And oh boy, I thought I removed this guy's rights, but apparently I did not. I'm going to have to do that before I put out this file. Luckily, I didn't put out this file yet, but I am going to have to do that. I don't know how he got all of a sudden rights to the Arizona Coyotes because he didn't last time I tested this out. Very, very weird. But anyways, at least I am noticing, so I got to write that down. So I do that before I put out this file because I have not put it out as of this recording. But it is good that I actually noticed that. So, because if I didn't notice that, I would not have been happy. So yeah, there's unsigned prospects for every single team, as you can see with like Arizona. I don't know if I'm going to go through every single team at this rate because I feel like it's going to take way too long because we have 28 teams to show you, the NHL, the AHL, that type of thing. But I will do my best to show you guys as much as I can. I just know that there was some people on Twitter that were asking about AHL ratings and stuff like that. And speaking of which, I'm not going to be showing you guys any of this stuff on my website. My website likely will not get much added to it, is because I don't really have the time to take 3,000-4,000 screenshots. I know some of you think I do. Well, one guy, at least on Twitter, thought I did. But I have a life. I don't have time to take 4,000 screenshots. So if you're looking for screenshots of everybody's attributes, there likely will not be any added to the website. So just keep that in mind. You guys might have to come up with your own attributes, but at least you'll be able to see some of the ratings here in this video so you guys can kind of make them similar. If we go to goaltenders, there's Dominik Hasek, 3 goalies in Buffalo. In the system wise, JP Dumont. So you do got some options to run with, and it's going to be interesting to see how some of these players develop. I hope a lot of them develop really well, but obviously I can't really control player development. It also depends on the situation the player is put in. But like, you got an unsigned Ryan Miller for the Buffalo Sabres. I had to actually put him on an OHL team just because obviously, yeah, you can't make unsigned American prospects, which is kind of dumb, but it's probably because they are thrown into the free agent pool. So yeah, there's basically all that. I don't think I'm going to show you guys any more NHL teams because I feel like it's just going to be getting a little bit redundant and this video is going to end up being way too long. So if you guys want me to do a full-on in-depth roster overview of my entire roster build, I could do that as a separate video in the next week or two. But for this video, I'm not going to show the entire thing because I want you guys to experience this roster on your own, obviously, because that makes it a lot more fun. So anyways, NHL and AHL, you can see that it's very in-depth and there's unsigned prospects for every team. Now if we head on over to the free agent pool, this is another very interesting thing. Every single team will have the chance to sign some very solid players. Now for this free agent pool, basically I have like players that were actual free agents or players that went to Europe to sign after the 98-99 season. You also have players that were technically drafted in 2000 and 2001 that were technically overagers during those drafts, because if you guys didn't know, back in the 2000s, Roman Cechmanek, for example, got drafted at like, I think 28, 29 years of age. So you will have those type of guys in the free agent market instead, because of the fact, obviously, it doesn't make sense. We can't make them as draft prospects in 18 years old. We want to have them as accurate ages. So instead, any team could sign them in the free agent pool. So in terms of goaltenders, if we sort this by overall rating, you can see basically everybody that's above a 48 overall is somebody I made. So all these goaltenders here you see are created by me, which is kind of crazy. So you even got guys like that hadn't played in the NHL in a while, like Jason Mazzotti, former Hartford Whaler, which is crazy. Jarmo Millis is there. Like, there's some really weird talent. There's even guys like Nick Backstrom, who had not made the NHL yet, obviously, at this point, because he didn't play till 2007, but he's a free agent. So you have some potential goaltenders, but you also do have a bunch of crap, too. You do have all these 48 overalls, like I said. These 48 overalls were players I had to lower, and there's no way of getting them to not appear in the free agent group. So if you see any real players that jump above a 48, not above a 48, above a 50, I should say, it's basically because they're actually getting growth as the AHL other goalie potentials, which hopefully is not the case. But yeah, you can see there's a lot of 48s. That's basically all the players I had to nerf. So you will see those guys still in the free agent pool, but there's a good chance a lot of them will retire very early into franchise mode and you won't have to deal with them. But anybody that's above a 48, so even this Yeremayev guy is somebody I actually made. So if we go to the defensive free agents, you can see led by Lubomir Sakaris. But yeah, there is a ton of talent. There's also some good potential guys like Lubomir Vishnevsky, who was actually drafted this season at 24 years of age. So yeah, you have some pretty good talent. You have some former good talent, guys that played in the NHL in the earlier 90s like Godinyak, for example. Guys that were coming into the NHL in a few years like Majewski, Anders Lilia, that type of thing, Marek Zidlichky. So yeah, it should be interesting to see how a lot of these guys develop. I'm hoping a lot of them actually develop into being good. You also have Mika Kiprusoff's brother, which is pretty cool. Kipper is in the AHL for the San Jose Sharks at this point in time, for the Kentucky Thoroughblades. Also, another thing I want to mention about my roster, if you're playing just games versus the AI, there is a jersey number glitch in the game right now that hasn't been fixed. So you might run into that where there's players or teams with jersey numbers that look very strange. It's because there's an actual glitch in the game. There's also AHL and NHL All-Star teams that I made for you to use in Play Now. So if you want to play games against the AI, then you could go ahead and use my roster that way. Obviously, this roster is not just meant for franchise mode. You could use it for, I guess, any offline game mode, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know how it works in BioPro, to be honest, though. You can always test it and see if it works in BioPro, but I don't think it does. I haven't tried BioPro in like a few years at this point, but I know it's a mess. But yeah, you can see all these 48s, once again, are players I had to nerf. So you can kind of see how much work there was to put into this roster, because not only did I have to make all these NHL players, I also had to nerf a bunch of guys that would appear in the free agent pool. So that way, there wasn't teams signing them. I also had to move team players to the international team so they wouldn't show up. that type of thing. Right wing wise, you got Thomas Sandstrom as the best right winger. Same with David Vaborny. Sandstrom actually went overseas to play, and Vaborny was obviously taken by the Blue Jackets, not in the expansion draft. I believe he signed there as a free agent, but you should see a bunch of random guys here throughout this. So I will scroll through all the free agents because there's not as much of them. There's like around 200 free agents, I think. But yeah, you got some very weird names. Like, does anybody even know Gatien Royer? If you know who Gatien Royer is, then obviously you're a complete nerd. But then again, I am as well. So, and on left wing side of things, bunch of, like I said, former NHLers like Brent Fedek, Fedek, that type of thing. Sylvain Turgeon, former Sens legend. So you can see there is a lot of weird names. And some of them might be able to help you out. Some of them you might want to sign for your AHL team. You even got a lot of guys that play in the NHL's now fathers, which is kind of cool. Like this is Juuso Parsonen's father, Timo Parsonen. He played a little bit with the Mighty Ducks. So you do have some very interesting things with that. So you will find some really weird results with that, where there's like former players. You also got guys like Mel Angelstad, who was an enforcer. And it's funny because he wore the number 69. So it was one of the only NHLers, I believe, that wore 69, other than, I believe it was Andrew Desjardins, the other one. But yeah, you can see you have a lot of players. Even this Richard Scott guy, nobody knows who he is probably, but he was an enforcer for the New York Rangers and their AHL team. And then this is the biggest free agent other than Czech Manic, that is Robert Reichel. Technically, he had Arizona rights at this point in time, but I basically put him as a free agent because of the fact he went overseas. Now, there is a couple other scenarios that I wanted to mention that I forgot about. Nikolai Habibulin technically was in the IHL at this point in time, but I still gave him Arizona rights, so I basically have him in the Arizona Coyotes AHL team. But if you're not Arizona, he will probably get thrown up to the NHL team, which kind of sucks, but is what it is. Also for Ottawa, Yashin held out the entire year because of a contract dispute. He is also in Ottawa's AHL team, so if you're doing an Ottawa franchise mode, maybe keep him in the AHL for the entire season. It's up to you on that front. But yeah, basically, there is those two guys in franchise mode, but I can't make them RFAs because they are too old to be RFAs, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, there's a ton of players and a ton of guys that are now coaches too. Like Jim Montgomery is a coach. He's a minor checking forward in this, so you can sign him for your AHL team if you want, or use him as a depth piece in the NHL. So yeah, there's a lot of random names. Andy McDonald's a free agent because he was an undrafted free agent signing by the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. But you should see some very weird names and names you've never heard of, names you haven't heard of in a long time. It's very fun looking through all of this and just seeing how it works out. Guys like Eric Perrin is in free agents as well. So you will have some potential guys, but also some guys, like I said, that are just not that good anymore. So once I skim through this, then we'll show you guys the draft class, and then I think that'll be it for this video. So yeah, that's basically all the free agents. Let me show you guys the draft class. In the draft class, like I said, I added like 3 to 4 rounds of prospects per draft. So this one is obviously the 2000 draft, and you'll have the 2001, the 2002, and the 2003 draft. So when you set the settings to load in terms of generated prospects and all that stuff, like you guys will see when I set up this franchise mode, is you'll see that there's not as much generated prospects, and you will not also have any of the real guys that were in. But you can see here we got, like, let's actually go by each position to make it a little bit more interesting. Goalie wise, you have Henrik Lundqvist in this draft. He's predicted to go a lot higher than Rick DiPietro, but Rick DiPietro is a lot more NHL ready. You also have guys like Ilya Brzgalov, who is 19 going on 20. Some of these guys were actually drafted as overagers. Some of these guys were actually fully undrafted, but I added them to the draft class just to give them a little bit more depth. So you guys have like Joey McDonald, for example. He was technically undrafted, but I decided to add him to his draft class that he would have been a part of because it gives a bit more depth to the draft class. You also have guys like Dan Ellis here, which is pretty cool. And yeah, guys like Curtis Sanford. You also have guys that are projected to go undrafted, which is kind of crazy. So guys like Brent Caron, who actually was a top 10 pick, he's supposed to go undrafted. You also have guys like Nolan Schaefer, who I made, Adam Burkle, Matthew Chouinard. So you will have some guys drop to the free agent pool after 1 year because they were undrafted in real life, but it's kind of neat. Defensively, you got a lot of defensive prospects like Ron Hainsey, Paul Martin, John Michael Lyles, Nick Kronwall, Rusty Kleslaw, Anton Volchenkov. Not going to show you guys every single prospect because I want you guys to be all of a sudden like, wait, this player was actually made when you were playing it. But yeah, there is some undrafted guys like Lassi Kukkonen. So, or actually, I think Kukkonen was drafted, but he wasn't drafted until he was like 24. So he is in this draft class because he was 18 at this point in time, I think. So you will get generated prospects still, but no real guys, like I said, like Michael Misa and any other good player. You also have like Marian Gaborik, who's projected to go number 1, Justin Williams, Brad Boyes, Pavel Vorobiev. I don't think is one I made. Is he? No, he might be the one I made. Yeah, Jason Williams, Michel Ouellette, Joel Ward, who was undrafted. So yeah, just a lot of depth, and you might see some players that you think are players I made, but they aren't players I made. They're just generated, like this Morozov guy is a generated guy right now. But if you get confused on what's generated and what's not, that might be a good thing, might not be. You also have like Danny Heatley, who was actually 19 when he was drafted. That's why he's already 18. Scott Hartnell, Alex Frolov, Chris Kunitz, who was undrafted, which is kind of cool. Rene Bourque, Rafi Torres. So if you want to draft Rafi Torres, 5th overall or whatever he was, taken by the Islanders. There we go. So yeah, there is some very intriguing players for sure. Travis Moen. And center-wise, the best center in this draft is Antoine Vermette, which shows you how bad this 2000 draft really was. Like, it is definitely very weak. 2000, 2001, and 2002 are all not the best draft classes, but when you get to the 03 draft, it should be one of the best drafts you are going to see in terms of this custom league. And then, like I said, I would recommend turning a draft class quality up to a little bit of a higher setting after that, because obviously it's better to probably have them at low when I have my generated prospects, but once you actually get to the point where there's no more prospects I made, then you're going to want to probably turn it up to high, so that, or medium, so that way you get actual good draft classes, because or else they might be very weak. So there is that. And I think that is pretty much it for this portion of the video. So if you guys want to see how to set it up now for franchise mode so it works properly and all that, check out the next portion of the video. If not, go check out the roster and leave me some feedback. Okay guys, so here's the setup portion of the 1999-2000 roster build. So I'm going to show you guys how to set it up for custom league so it works the way I intend. So you're going to want to have 28 teams, because obviously there's 28 NHL teams at this point in time. And you're also going to want to have 6 divisions with the 2 conferences. And technically, since obviously salary cap didn't exist in this point in time, I would recommend turning it off. But you could turn it on and fiddle around with the settings if you really want to. But I would recommend just turning it off for the complete experience. Then if we go over to schedule, you're going to see that there is obviously the 82 games and stuff like that, like there normally is. We are going to be swapping this to 20 divisional games. We're also going to be swapping this to 40 conference games, and that will leave 22 interconference games. So that's what the setup is like for the NHL schedule. In terms of like actual standings format, you're gonna have a tiebreaker of single overtime 5-on-5, I think it was. It could have been 4-on-4, but regardless, single overtime. And then OT losses would result in no points. So that's basically how the point format was at that point in time. We're going to go over to playoff qualification. We're going to change this over to conference, and we're going to turn on playoff reseeding. So that way you get the playoffs reseed with the highest seeded team always getting that home ice advantage against like whatever team they play against. And then obviously it's still 8 teams that qualify and all this type of jargon. Then we head on over to this, and still the exact same as it is in today's NHL, so we keep that the same. AHL wise, technically there was 4 divisions in the AHL at this point in time, but I do have IHL teams I added to this roster as well. So we will still keep it on 4 divisions, but the divisions won't be fully accurate to the time period because of the fact that we have IHL teams in the AHL. So we'll just leave it like that. AHL schedule wise, I don't know what the actual format was for the AHL at this point in time, so I am just going to leave it as same as what the NHL was, just to make it very similar. So we're going to leave that the same. Standings formats, once again, we're just going to do the exact same thing as the NHL. I don't know if the AHL had shootouts at this point in time. I don't think they did, but we're just going to have basically the same setup in both leagues. And once again, we're going to have the qualification type being the exact same. I don't know if it was divisional at that point in time or what, but we are going to set this up the exact same way as the NHL. So teams that qualify, this should be 8 I think, and that should be good. Yeah, that should be pretty much set up properly, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so that's basically the setup portion of this, and obviously now is the big part of this. So I'm basically going to run down, do a little bit of a jump cut so you guys could see exactly how you should have every team set up with the substituted AHL teams. So I will see you guys in a second. Okay, so once you have substituted in all 28 created teams, you can see you have the following AHL teams tied directly to the NHL teams like they should. So just make sure you have basically like the teams that are on the bottom tied to the NHL team that is shown on this page. Like I was mentioning before, if you want to use the created teams I made for the NHL, you could definitely substitute those in for the NHL teams, but you will not have the unsigned prospects. So I recommend just keeping with the NHL teams in the game. So like the Anaheim Ducks, for example, instead of the Mighty Ducks. But like I said, if you want those jerseys I made, those arenas I made, instead of the unsigned guys, I would recommend using my created teams. But you can see here with like Anaheim, you got the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks. Arizona Coyotes, you got the Springfield Falcons. Boston, you got Providence still. Buffalo, you still have Rochester. St. John for Calgary. Carolina, you have the Cincinnati Cyclones, who were in the IHL at this point in time. So there is 2 Cincinnati teams, which is kind of a bit confusing, but you guys should be able to understand that. Chicago has the Cleveland Lumberjacks of the IHL. Colorado has the created Hershey Bears, not the real one that's still existing and is affiliated to Washington. Dallas has the Michigan K-Wings. Detroit has the Manitoba Moose, the created version, so don't use the real one. Edmonton has the Hamilton Bulldogs. The Florida Panthers have the Louisville Panthers. The Los Angeles Kings have the Massachusetts Lock Monsters, not the Lowell Lock Monsters, because Lowell, for some reason, isn't a city name in this game, which is kind of dumb. Montreal has the Quebec Citadels. Nashville has the Milwaukee Admirals, so the created version of this, once again, just copy over the created team instead of using the real team for the AHL. New Jersey has the Albany River Rats. New York Islanders have the created Chicago Wolves, not the one that's in the game. New York Rangers have the Hartford Wolfpack, the created version again. Ottawa has the created Grand Rapids Griffins, so don't use Detroit's Grand Rapids Griffins because it would assign basically Detroit's prospects to Ottawa's AHL team, which is not what you want. Philadelphia has the Philadelphia Phantoms. Pittsburgh still has the created Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. San Jose has the Kentucky Thoroughblades, which is kind of cool. St. Louis has the Worcester Ice Cats. Tampa has the Detroit Vipers of the IHL. Toronto has the St. John's Maple Leafs. Vancouver has the Syracuse Crunch, the created version, not the one that's tied to the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the Washington Capitals have the Portland Pirates. Also, technically the Atlanta Thrashers is the Winnipeg Jets in this. I know if you want to use the Atlanta Thrashers, you'd have to get rid of their unsigned guys, but if you want to use the Winnipeg Jets still, and you're okay with that, you would substitute in their AHL team, which their AHL team is the Orlando Solar Bears. So that is basically the setup for the AHL teams. I hope you understand how to do that. It's pretty self-explanatory. Just basically substitute their current AHL affiliates for the ones that were just shown. Next, I'm going to show you guys what the divisions should look like when they're fully set up and ready to go. Okay, so once you have the divisions realigned, you should have something that looks like this. So in the NHL, you should have the Pacific Division with the Dallas Stars, the LA Kings, the Arizona Coyotes, the San Jose Sharks, and the Anaheim Ducks. In terms of the Northwest Division, you should have Colorado, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Calgary. Central Division is still pretty similar to what it is right now: Chicago, Nashville, Detroit, and St. Louis. Then you go to the Eastern Conference, which has a lot more teams. You got Ottawa, Boston, Buffalo, Montreal making up the Northeast Division. You have the New York Islanders, Philadelphia Flyers, New Jersey Devils, New York Rangers, and Pittsburgh Penguins making up the Atlantic. And then for the Southeast Division, you have Washington, Florida, Carolina, Winnipeg/Atlanta, and Tampa Bay. So there's the NHL setup. Once again, rename the divisions to Pacific, Northwest, Central, Northeast, Atlantic, and Southeast if you want to. You don't have to technically rename them that, but honestly, if you want it realistic, then rename it that. In terms of the AHL, this, like I said, is kind of messed up in a sense because the fact we have basically, I think it was like 19 AHL teams or something like that, and we have like 9 IHL teams that are being integrated into this AHL roster just because that way we have enough AHL teams for each NHL team. So you don't have to rename the divisions this. You don't have to rename the conference to IHL E or the IHL West. But if you want to, you can. So this is basically how I have the division set up, but you could set this up any way you really want to. So in the Atlantic Division here, you got Cleveland, you got Michigan, Milwaukee, so the 3 IHL teams. And then you have the actual teams that were in the Atlantic Division at that point in time, which are the Lowell Log Monsters, St. John's Flames, Quebec Citadels, and the St. John's Maple Leafs. So there is that. We then head to the Empire Division, which also has some IHL teams, which are the Grand Rapids Griffins and the Orlando Solar Bears. And then in terms of the actual AHL teams, you got the Albany River Rats, the Rochester Americans, the Hamilton Bulldogs, the Syracuse Crunch, and the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins. Then we head over to the IHLW, or Western Conference, I guess, in a sense. The Mid-Atlantic Division has a couple IHL teams as well. Those being, the Detroit Vipers and the Cincinnati Cyclones. I wanted to make sure both Cincinnati teams were in the same division, so that's why I did that way. But in terms of AHL teams, you got the Kentucky Thoroughblades, the Philadelphia Phantoms, the Louisville Panthers, and the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks. And also the Hershey Bears. I almost forgot about them for some weird reason. And then in terms of the New England Division, you of course got the Providence Bruins, the Portland Pirates, the Chicago Wolves from the IHL, the Hartford Wolfpack, so you got a Battle of Wolves, which is kind of interesting, the Worcester Ice Cats, the Manitoba Moose from the IHL, and the Springfield Falcons. So you should have it set up something like that. You could also have it set up any way you want to, though, really, because I honestly don't have a set way for the AHL. But the NHL, for sure, obviously, should look like this when you're all done and set up. Okay, so now that that is shown, let's go to the next stage of this. Obviously, a lot of this stuff is basically up to you in a sense. So owner mode for me, I turn that always off, but you could keep that on if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend so. Player morale, that's up to you as well if you want to have player morale or not. Same with Fog of War and all these other things. So obviously, I'm going to keep that all off. And then in terms of actual rules and setting, this is where it gets a little bit more in depth again. So I will not quickly show you guys, but I will show you guys as best as I can how you should set this up. So in terms of setting this up properly so it works best, obviously, I would recommend still turning trade difficulty to hard. That's what I would normally do anyways when you're starting a franchise mode. But if you wanted to be easy to trade for your favorite superstars, obviously you could turn it down to low. Waivers I usually leave on. And then in terms of stuff down here, actually there's nothing on this part. I think it's on the next portion if I remember right. Yeah, I think it's in advanced settings. Yes, okay, so in terms of setting up this sim engine scoring, this is going to be completely up to you as well. Basically what I was thinking is having low scoring because obviously this is still during the dead puck era. So if you want to get low scoring, obviously send it to low. However, you're going to get goaltenders with ridiculous numbers, and some of them might generate crazy amounts of X factors. Like I think I saw in my test run, Kevin Weeks generate like 5 X factors because of it. So I wouldn't recommend putting it to low, even though technically it was low scoring at that point. I would recommend keeping it to medium scoring. And then I would also recommend, I think there was a shot one, right? Yeah, the shot frequency. I would recommend sending this to medium or to low, so that way you get goalies putting up ridiculous numbers, maybe still in a sense, but it's all up to you on that front. I would still recommend not having it on high though, because you're going to see more goal scoring. Guys like Korea are going to go completely off otherwise. So you guys can fiddle around with these settings and see if it worked good for you. If it doesn't, obviously come back and do it again. That type of thing. In terms of like draft class quality and generated prospect quality, I would recommend keeping these both to low in the first year of your testing. That way you do not get basically a lot of generated prospects with the prospects I made, because I made 3 to 4 rounds of prospects. So that way you're just getting a couple EA generated guys thrown in throughout the draft as well. Because I took out guys like Michael Misa and all that type of thing. So I would recommend having it to low to start, but obviously you could change it to medium once you get to past the 4 drafts that I made. That's what I would recommend, at least to start off with. But you could honestly try high draft class quality with the amount of prospects I made still if you want to. It's up to you. And then I think that's almost everything on that. Retired jerseys, this is a crucial one. Obviously turn this off, because obviously you don't want Daniel Alfredson wearing number 12 instead of number 11, that type of thing. And yeah, that's basically the setup, I think, for this. Obviously gameplay sliders is completely up to you as well. If you have a slider set you want to try and use on this roster, why not? Also, if you have a set slider that actually works well with my rosters, you could honestly let me know, and I might end up trying to use it and seeing how it plays out in terms of gameplay. I'm not a person that usually plays against AI that much, but Usually I always turn injury frequency obviously down to like 9 or 10 because it just egregious the amount of injuries in franchise mode. So that's basically how you would set this up for franchise mode, and that is basically my roster build for 1999-2000. I hope you guys enjoyed this roster. Like I said, it took me a very long time to do this, and I'm very excited for you guys to finally be able to download them on Xbox Series S and X. And yeah, please let me know if you run into any issues down below in the comments and stuff like that with this roster. Like if there's anything I can do to help you guys out in terms of setup, or if there's anything that you're running into franchise-wise that you're like, why is this happening? Let me know, and I will try my best to get it addressed. I mean, I could even bring up to EA if anything is like there's a bug or something like that that's not doing anything. Let me know down below, and I'll see you guys next time.